God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding. We, thine unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thine heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laid aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the king, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. I will do it.
This honorable House now resumes its sitting. Call of the roll.
Mrs. Holness, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Dr. Chang, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Samuda, Ms. Grange, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malou Fort, Dr. Tufton, Mr. McKenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mr. Charles, Mr. Green, Mr. Morgan, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Terry Long, Ms. Smith, Dr. Dunn, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Mr. Main, Mr. Davis, Mr. Witter, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Clark, Mr. Cousins, Ms. Crawford, Ms. Daly, Ms. Davis, Mr. Golding, Mr. Graham, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hamilton, Ms. Hannah, Dr. Guy, Mr. Henriquez, Mr. Henry, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lawrence, Ms. Lee, Mr. Miller, Mr. Montague, Ms. Morrison, Mrs. Nita Garvey, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Siblist, Mr. Slowly, Mrs. Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Wright.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the meeting of the House be suspended briefly to enable the members to pay tribute to fallen soldiers and veterans of World Wars I and II.
Members, is it the wish of the House that the meeting be suspended for the purpose outlined a moment ago by our House leader? Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Members, The Armistice Day, signaling the end of World War I, was signed on the 11th of November 1918 at 11 a.m. It therefore means that Friday, November 11th, this year, 2022, marks 104 years since the armistice was signed. The first actual Poppy Day was held in Britain on November 11th, 1921. Today, we are lending our support to the Jamaica Legion to show that we care and recognize the sacrifice they made in the past that resulted in the freedom we now all enjoy today. The Jamaica Legion representative is retired Sergeant Peter Xavier Williams of the Jamaica Defense Force, who is here to take us through the drills. Sergeant. I now invite you to stand.
May we ever pray, Lord God of hosts, be with us yet, lest we forget. And now the minute silence. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not wear them, nor the years condemn, as the going down of the sun, and in the morning we will remember them. We will remember them.
Please be seated. I want, on behalf of all of us as members of Parliament, to thank retired Sergeant Peter Xavier Williams for being here with us this afternoon and reminding us of how much we owe to the work of those who went before us, and we honor the sacrifices they made for the freedoms we now enjoy. Thank you very much, Sergeant Williams. Members, even as we have finished paying tribute, and I want to welcome everyone who is here with us this evening. I'm going to use the opportunity to welcome the lovely students from the Donald Quarry High School who are here with us this evening. They all look so beautiful and radiant, and I trust that this evening will be an informative afternoon for you as you share with us in Parliament. Members, I'm going to ask that we have suspended, and I'm giving you an opportunity, all of us, to go out and probably contribute to Sergeant Williams's cause today, and so we'll suspend the sitting for, he is placing poppies on our shoulders. So as we do, it's just a contribution as we honor, not a donation, a contribution. And so I'm going to ask House Leader that we suspend the Parliament for a few further minutes to allow us to give a little contribution to the cause.
wish there were a way your community could get funding to improve a school, health center, sports program, and more? There is. It's the Constituency Development Fund. Here are a few things you probably didn't know about the CDF and how you can make it work better for you. The CDF policy promotes citizen participation in community development and protection of taxpayers' funds. It outlines that MPs are to meet with citizens at least once every 2 years to agree on the projects needed. You know, it used to be once a year? We should really go back to that. Projects developed without community consultation are not to be approved by the bipartisan CDF Parliamentary Committee. There are 26 government agencies that implement projects, usually for a small fee. Funds are provided directly from the Office of the Prime Minister to the implementing agency, not through the Member of Parliament. The CDF unit monitors project costs and implementation, so if you have questions about how the CDF are run in your community, contact them. To ensure no one project or community gets all the funds, there are 6 project categories with spending limits for each. There must be no less than 5 and no more than 20 projects each year. To learn more, visit jampja.org to view your MP's CDF info and tell them how this fund has impacted you. If you don't see your MP's CDF reports, then put them under little pressure, man. Call, tweet, email. Ask them when they'll submit it and when is the next CDF meeting. Change is possible. It's already happening. What we need is you. A message from the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, funded by the European Union and the Inter-American Development Bank in partnership with the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica.
Something is happening for someone in this country every single day as a result of the actions of this government. The beneficiary of this house and the hundreds of people who have benefited so far, they feel good and their families feel good.
Oh, I'm on top of the world. It's just a dream come true. Somebody see that they deserve it and then brought it to life for me.
There was no schism, there was nothing there, and it was just, okay, you're in need, and I'm going to do whatever I can do to ensure that you're helped, because you're somebody that is in help. It renewed such a hope in me, I want that to be understood.
I thank the team, I thank everybody for this house.
We must take all steps to ensure that whoever is the beneficiary is genuinely in need and deserving of it.
How do bills become law in Jamaica? Laws are made to create order, to ensure our safety, and to protect our rights against abuses by other citizens, organizations, and even the government itself. A bill is a proposal for either a new law or for a change to an existing law. Jamaica's parliament is responsible for making our laws, and that responsibility is shared between 2 houses. There are 21 parliamentarians appointed from both political parties to the upper house, also known as the Senate. And there are 63 members of parliament that we, the people, elect to the lower house, also known as the House of Representatives. To pass a law, there is a minimum of 6 stages required in each house. The process can begin in the upper house by a senator or in the lower house by your member of parliament. And their proposals for a new bill can certainly start with you, the citizen. Now, since the process often begins in the House of Representatives, let's start there. 1. The first stage begins with the introduction by the minister responsible for the bill, followed by the first reading of the bill by the clerk to the houses. This clerk is more like the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer for the Parliament. An announcement of the bill is published in the Gazette. This is a public newsletter that the government uses to inform the citizens of what the Parliament is doing on your behalf. 2. The second reading begins with a summary of the bill by the minister. The main reasons for the bill are discussed both by the government and opposition members to determine if Jamaicans would really be better off with the new law or changes to an existing law. A vote is taken by the House to determine if the bill will move to the committee stage. Sometimes before going to that stage, the minister responsible for the bill can recommend the use of a joint select committee. It's called joint as its members are taken from both the upper and lower house. To benefit from greater consultation, the committee is empowered to invite the public to share their views of the bill in writing or in person, and does so through radio, TV, and newspaper adverts. This Joint Select Committee submits its recommendations to the House of Representatives. The House debates this report, and a vote is taken to determine if the bill should go on to the committee stage, where it is examined by a committee of the whole House. Yes, that's the name. And that's what it is, a committee of all the members of Parliament that carefully examines each clause and makes improvements to ensure the bill will achieve its objectives. As chairman, the Speaker of the House monitors the process to make sure the rules of the House are obeyed and the process moves along smoothly. 4. The Committee of the whole House examines the bill clause by clause, then sends its recommendations for changes to the House of Representatives. This is called the report stage. 5. The bill then passes to the third reading to allow a final opportunity for MPs to make changes before it is sent to senators in the upper house. 6 to 10. In the upper house, the senators go through the same steps we just described. If any changes are made, the bill has to be returned to the House of Representatives for their discussion and approval. Now, if the bill had started in the upper house, it would also have to be returned to them for approval of any changes made by the lower house. 11. Throughout the entire process, the bill is being checked by the Legislative Council. That's the Parliament's lawyer. But before the last step, a copy is sent to the Attorney General of Jamaica for final review and certification. 12. If all is well, the bill is sent to receive the royal assent from the Governor General as the representative of the Queen, Elizabeth II. The bill is now an Act of Parliament. The Act is gazetted, and the rights of Jamaicans are further preserved and protected by a new law.
There is a fundamental and irreconcilable conflict between the interests of the tobacco industry and public policy interests. The tobacco industry, for profit, produces and promotes a product that has been scientifically proven to be highly addictive and causes millions of deaths per year. This is in conflict with the intent of public policies, particularly those related to safeguarding the health and well-being of citizens. In keeping with Jamaica's treaty obligations, the proposed Tobacco Control Act makes provision for the strict regulation of the interaction between public officials and the tobacco industry. Strong tobacco control policies, such as the provisions in the proposed act, will safeguard public health policies and give the next generation a chance to live and breathe easily.
Do you wish there were a way your community could get funding to improve a school, health center, sports program, and more? There is! It's the Constituency Development Fund. Here are a few things you probably didn't know about the CDF and how you can make it work better for you. The CDF policy promotes citizen participation in community development and the protection of taxpayers' funds. It outlines that MPs are to meet with citizens at least once every 2 years to agree on the projects needed. You know, it used to be once a year. We should really go back to that. Projects developed without community consultation are not to be approved by the bipartisan CDF Parliamentary Committee. There are 26 government agencies that implement projects, usually for a small fee. Funds are provided directly from the Office of the Prime Minister to the implementing agency, not through the Member of Parliament. The CDF unit monitors project costs and implementation. So if you have questions about how the CDF are run in your community, contact them. To ensure no one project or community gets all the funds, there are 6 project categories with spending limits for each. There must be no less than 5 and no more than 20 projects each year. To learn more, visit jampja.org to view your MP's CDF info and tell them how this fund has impacted you. If you don't see your MP's CDF reports, then put them under little pressure, man. Call, tweet, email. Ask them when they'll submit it and when is the next CDF meeting. Change is possible. It's already happening. What we need is you. A message from the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, funded by the European Union and the Inter-American Development Bank in partnership with the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica.
Jamaica and its workforce are advancing quickly. Life-changing opportunities are arising. You need training and support. We are the Renewed Heart NSTA Trust, committed to providing new and emerging skills training and opportunities. Come to Heart. We'll help you claim your place in the workforce of the future.
Let us resolve our family disputes peacefully. A family is a circle of love, support, and strength. Violence has no place.
The proceeding was brought to you by the Office of the Prime Minister.
This House now resumes its sitting. Before we were formally engaged as members of Parliament sitting here, I made some remarks about the beautiful students up in the gallery this evening, but we were not in session, and so I want that Hansard should carry my comments in relation to how beautiful all those children in the gallery look this evening, and they are from the Donald Quarry High School, and we are so happy to have you, and we want to welcome you heartily, and we want to make sure we're going to behave ourselves, and you're going to learn so much from what happens here this evening. And so it's going to be a very informative evening for you, something that you can talk about at school when you get back to school tomorrow about your experience here at the sitting of this Parliament. So I want to welcome you and just ask you to just sit back, as they say, relax, open your minds, and take in and learn as much as you can from all the members as they speak this evening in the session. I am going to now call on the Minister of Education, who is here with us also, because I think it's the opening of the school term, and it is wonderful to have you. And I know the Minister of Education herself, not school term, it's an opportunity. That's right. Really, I did say, I did say at the beginning of my remarks, members, that it's been a long while since we had such a large contingent of students, and I think for that reason I just lost and said the opening. But I know the Minister of Education, who has put so much effort into the school year and back to school and all the COVID and everything that takes place at school, it would like herself to welcome you this afternoon to the sitting of Parliament. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for this opportunity to welcome students from the Donald Quarry High School. We have students from grades 9, 10, and 11 with us today, Madam Speaker, in the gallery. We love, yes, please, give them a run. Yes, yes, yes. Madam Speaker, having students in our parliament is a staple. It is something that we encourage in education. It's all part of education for them to understand the governance process that we have in the country, to understand this arm of government, how laws are made and passed. Today they're going to be witnessing the Prime Minister speaking, the Minister of Finance and the Public Service speaking to the supplementary budget. And as you said, Madam Speaker, we'd love for them to listen intently. I know they will not understand everything that they're hearing, but the questions that they can take back to their classrooms will also help them. We do have 2 teachers with them as well today. I know we have a social studies teacher here. Yes, and you know, it's part of the learning process for children in school. We're happy to have them as well as we celebrate Youth Month in Jamaica for the month of November. Again, this is all part of us engaging with our young people in different ways so that they understand the totality of what it means to be a citizen in this country. So, Madam Speaker, I want to say welcome again to the students from the Donald Quarry High School. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking that journey to be in our parliament with us today to watch and observe what is happening today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
All right. The leader of opposition business will also join.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I also wish to welcome the students from Donald Quarry, a school that is just outside of my borders. And sometimes I do feel like I'm the Member of Parliament because I do have many students from East Kingston that attend the school. I want to salute the teachers who are here as well. Madam Speaker, as you know, we have gone through for 2.5 years the problem with COVID. And so this is the first semester, really, term that the schools are back face-to-face. And as we know, in some of the schools, we've seen some challenges. Thank God that Donald Quarry hasn't seen those, and as far as I'm aware, the relationships that exist there continue to be good amongst students and teachers, among students and students. The Minister of Education and myself, we were recently at another school in my constituency where we do face some challenges, especially from the community that surrounds the school, and I was very grateful that she found the time to sit with me to assist as we brought the community together to explain to them their responsibility, that the school is there as an institution really for the community, and that it makes no sense for the community to prey on the school. We've had some unfortunate incidents recently. I won't go into those details because amidst the difficulties, amidst the problems, there are glimmers of hope. And I really want to emphasize that. In fact, out of the meeting, we had a community member who felt so driven that I have recently recommended his appointment for the school board because he wants to make not only financial contribution, but his own personal contribution to the running of the school in given time. No, I think the minister would approve of the person. So I'm pleased about that. The minister mentioned to the students that they will hear from members on that side. Today you'll also hear from members on this side. I sit here as the leader of opposition business in the parliament, and my counterpart is a member sitting directly in front of me. And of course, to my left is we're going to use up some time, is the leader of the opposition, who no doubt will be on his feet later on today. And beside him is our spokesperson on finance, who will be asking certain questions of the Prime Minister today. And also, when the Minister of Finance speaks, he will be the person to respond. And beside him is our spokesperson on social and labor and social development, and a member from Southwest St. Andrew. So we're all seated here as elected representatives of the people. Across from the member from Southwest St. Andrew is the member from Southeast St. Anne. We're not allowed to call names inside here, even though sometimes you wouldn't believe it. But so it's a member from Southeast St. Anne and our spokesperson on foreign affairs and foreign trade. And beside her, we have the member from Western St. Andrew, and yes, and behind, yes, and he's also spokesman on logistics and a whole lot of things. Yes, behind me is the deputy leader of the House. She's referred to as the whip. So if, for example, we need to ensure that our members are here on time and that they vote according to what we have determined, it's the whip who determines that. And she's a member from St. Catherine North Central. Again, I can't call her name, but my nephew will know that. And then beside her, we have the member from St. Mary Central. He's our spokesperson on health and wellness. And you'll be very familiar with him. Beside him is a member from Northwest Manchester. He's our spokesman on transport and works. And beside him is our member from St. Catherine Eastern. And she's our spokesperson on social transformation and gender and some other things too. And beside her is a member from Southwest Clarendon. He's our spokesman on agriculture. Yes, he is our spokesperson on agriculture. So we are delighted to have you, and we're looking forward to some of you eventually joining us or replacing us in this chamber. Thank you very much.
I'm going to introduce the entire. No, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and welcome to the young people from Donald Quarry. I think it's more than anything. Is the jacket well? It's good? Thank you. I know you're coming over soon, so you can provide more help. And I want to acknowledge today, we're in Youth Month, and I think it's very important that the largest assembly of young people I have seen since I've been here is in this month. Minister, you would have been at the launch on the weekend, and I think particularly important as the young people are here is that the entire Parliament recognizes your importance as the foundation of the future of our society. And we believe that an understanding of who makes your laws and how your laws are made is very important for you to develop, to contribute as citizens to this society, to make it a better society than what it is now. A society that you can want to stay, want to raise families and do business in. Minister, also want to recognize the work that you've been doing this Youth Month with the Youth Advisory Council. They're active members on this side. Would have met with them recently from the executive to discuss with them some of the challenges that youth face and we're planning to meet with them again this Youth Month to be a part of that conversation. I also want to recognize the work that is being done by the Youth and Adolescent Policy Division of the ministry. I've seen the calendar for Youth Month. It is packed full of events from across the island. One of the concerns I had initially was the demographic characteristic and socioeconomic characteristic of the programs, and I've seen an updated copy where they're in various communities, inner city communities, rural communities. They also have an aspect that deals with persons with different abilities, and I just want to congratulate your team there at the ministry. I don't think a lot of us recognize how important Youth Month is. It is the one month that the government focuses significantly. We focus generally on young people, but for Youth Month, the entire Ministry of Education and many other agencies in government are focused on the things, the interests of youth. And I just want us as a parliament over the next several days to engage with young people more pointedly in your constituencies, understand what their concerns are, and see how you can partner with them to solve some of those challenges. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs.
Madam Speaker, school to the Parliament, and I just, with your permission, want to invite their attention to the mace. There is a symbol in the Parliament that has to be present at every sitting of the Parliament. It is this seemingly metal object. It is called the mace. And through you, Madam Speaker, just to let them know that in early parliaments, the mace was used as a weapon to protect the Speaker, the chair that is held by you and the King. But today, it is used as the symbol and power of the Speaker. I don't think that there is any need to protect the Speaker in the House. But just so you know that there are traditions around the Parliament, and an important tradition is the presence of the mace in the House. You can look it up, and you can go away feeling that you have learned something here. I hope that teachers will continue to bring their students to the House of Parliament to expose them to the important business of the nation. Madam Speaker, thank you.
Well, I'm sure all our students from the Donald Quarry High School and the teacher that is with them feel very welcome to this sitting of the Parliament. And as the Minister said of Information Youth, that it is fitting that we have placed all this emphasis on you this evening because November is indeed Youth Month. So feel welcome and learn as much as your little brains can hold. House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also wish to welcome the students here and to say to you that I rise as the acting House Leader. And on that side, the Leader of Opposition Business rose and spoke, and I am his counterpart on this side. I happen to be acting for another minister, we're not to call names here, who is House Leader, and we are the majority side. If you see the numbers. Too many to introduce at this time. But just to say, we are at one in welcoming you. And at the same time, students, the Prime Minister has just arrived, and I'm sure you all welcome him as well. Thank you. So, Madam Speaker, at this time, I think you will go through the agenda as normal, and yes, thank you.
Statements by ministers.
So, Madam Speaker, statement by ministers, we will have a statement by the Honorable Nigel Clark, Minister of Finance and the Public Service. And he will, there are copies of the statements that will be distributed. You don't have copies. Okay. Madam Speaker, Minister of Finance will make a statement.
Minister, do you have copies for the opposition?
Madam Speaker, the Minister will speak when he tables the supplementary estimates. All right, so we, yeah.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following. White paper number 2 of 2022 entitled The National Diaspora Policy. Ministry paper number 92 of 2022 entitled The Passport, Immigration and Citizenship Agency Annual Report for the financial year ending March 31, 2012. The annual report and audited financial statement of the Aeronautical Telecommunications Limited for the financial year 2020-2021. Jamaica Public Body's first supplementary estimates of revenue and expenditure for the financial year ended March 2023. Information Technology Audit Report and the Application Management and Data Automatum Software Application and Information Security Control. Compliance Audit Compendium Report on COVID-19 expenditures from the Ministry of Health and Wellness and Ministry of Labor and Social Security. Report of the Commission to inquire into the emoluments of judges of the parish courts and other specified officers for the year 2021, dated November 15, 2021. And the Jamaica First Supplementary Estimates 2022-2023.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move the following motion. Be it resolved that the first supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2023, and the Jamaica Public Body's first supplementary estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2023, which were laid on the table of the House on the 8th day of November 2022, be referred to the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Questions and answers to questions.
Madam Speaker, can I invite the Prime Minister to answer the questions that are tabled in my name?
A copy of the version that is not finalized, but you could just. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The names were pointed something.
Oh. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me thank the member from South East St. Andrew for raising the question. The member is the Member of Parliament for the area in which Vale Royal is located. Question 1. Would the Prime Minister indicate whether Vale Royal is designated as a national monument under the Jamaica National Heritage Trust Act? Vale Royal has been recognized and treated as a national monument since 1958 under the Jamaica National Trust Commission Act, which was repealed and replaced by the Jamaica National Heritage Trust Act of 1985. The records show that Vale Royal was listed in the Jamaica Gazette of 1988 and 1991, respectively, as a national monument. There are certain legal steps that are outstanding to provide the protection of the law as contemplated by the 1985 Act. I understand that steps were taken to fulfill all the requirements with the publication of the draft declaration in April 1, 1999, in that issue of the Jamaica Gazette, and the relevant notice provided. Madam Speaker, there seems to have been some delay in completing this process since that time, and I have now given instruction for the remaining procedures to be immediately completed without delay so that Vale Royal can be officially and formally classified under the protection of the Jamaica National Heritage Trust Act. But it's important to note, Madam Speaker, that we have treated it as if it were formally and officially recognized under the Act. Question 2. Would the Prime Minister indicate the government agency or department which has responsibility for the maintenance and upkeep of the Vale Royal property and its buildings? The Office of the Prime Minister is the ministry with responsibility for the maintenance of the property and its buildings. The office has responsibility for the utilities and maintenance of the ground. In terms of security, the Jamaica Constabulary Force has responsibility for the provision of 24-hour security for the premises. Question number 3, would the Prime Minister state the short-term plans for the preservation and restoration of Vale Royal given its visible deterioration? Based on an assessment of Vale Royal, the grounds and the buildings, which was done as far back as 2013, it has been noted that there are significant structural problems which would limit the use of Vale Royal. Based on the level of deterioration, the current maintenance regime would not be adequate, as the need for rehabilitative work would be over and above the available resources. Madam Speaker, in the last 3 years, we have seen further deterioration in certain sections of the building, and we have seen some failures in the facade and in certain areas, particularly the exterior ceiling work. These failures, Madam Speaker, would have significantly and further limited the use of the building. And Madam Speaker, we took a decision that we would not use the premises for certain kinds of events and activities, because of the concerns for the safety of the persons who would be in the building and for the protection of the building itself as a national monument. Madam Speaker, it would not have been prudent to increase allocations to the maintenance of Vale Royal in the last 2 years, Madam Speaker, considering that the government had to choose its priorities carefully in managing the COVID-19 pandemic. So, Madam Speaker, this year, however, we have started considerations as to the provisions that should be made in the upcoming budget to increase the allocations, not to do anything dramatic, because we have to be very careful how we make such allocations, but certainly to make allocations sufficient to preserve and protect this national asset. Would the Prime Minister indicate the status of the artwork, furniture, and other items that were housed in the main building of the property? Madam Speaker, our records indicate that all assets that are housed on the main building of the property are being maintained and are in place. Question 5. Would the Prime Minister indicate whether the government plans to restore Vale Royal as it is the official residence of the Prime Minister? Madam Speaker, as the first priority, we will be ensuring that all repairs required to ensure that the integrity and decor of the building is maintained. That is our first priority. An assessment has been done, and a proposal for its restoration will guide this work. And we are now reviewing costings, as I have said, at this time. Madam Speaker, I'm reviewing options presented to me by the Jamaica National Heritage Trust for its immediate and future use. The structure, Madam Speaker, was originally the residence of the Minister of Finance, who ultimately, in the case of the Most Honorable Edward Philip George Siaga, became Prime Minister. So, Madam Speaker, I phrase it in this way to communicate that Vale Royal was not the original official residence of the Prime Minister. All right, Madam Speaker, Jamaica House is actually the official residence of the Prime Minister. But because, Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance was also at that time the Prime Minister, it took on that designation. But I think we can all agree that the current facilities and the current structure at Vale Royal are not suitable for the purpose of being the official residence of the Prime Minister. Madam Speaker, the Vale Royal will continue, however, to facilitate, where possible, protocol activities and other activities related to the office of the Prime Minister. It is proposed, Madam Speaker, that the Vale Royal House and the property could be repurposed to include a library and museum of all Prime Ministers, that is a repository of documents and memorabilia of our Prime Ministers. That's one suggestion that has been made. from the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. It could become, if we invest in it significantly, a protocol house which will host guests from time to time that visit Jamaica, or host functions and entertainment, which it used to do. Or, Madam Speaker, it could become a protocol house that is in the pool of protocol houses that could be made available to ministers or other officials of government to become a residence. Madam Speaker, these are under contemplation. No decision has been made as to what we would use it for. If the answer to the above is not in the affirmative, would the Prime Minister state what the plans for Vale Royal property are and whether there will be any consultation with the residents of the neighbouring properties regarding same? Madam Speaker, as I've said before, the contemplations and the definitive answer is that whatever we decide to do, the neighbours and the general community must be consulted. I want to repeat that. Whatever we decide to do with the property, the neighbourhood and the general community must be consulted. Madam Speaker, I'm certain that I will have opportunity with the follow-on question, but I think I should just say it clearly here. There is no intent to knock down Vale Royal and have it sold or developed into apartments. It is utter nonsense. The government has been very cautious about treating with this national asset. This building is, I believe, over 300 years old. And we have been very cautious because whichever way you turn, Madam Speaker, you will be criticized. If we spend resources on it, the same people who are asking questions now will say, why are you spending resources on this? And if you don't spend on it, the same people ask, why are you not spending on it? We have been very careful, Madam Speaker, because the priority right now, Madam Speaker, to be frank and to be fair, we could not make that a priority expenditure at this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. Before I ask the questions, and I will indicate why I ask these questions, the place has been allowed to just run down, the grounds. And while I accept everything you have said about the considerations, we must ensure that the grounds are kept properly. They're basic maintenance. I mean, I'll tell you, you can pass there and sometimes the grass highlight this. And I'm not exaggerating. I was prompted to ask these questions because the people who live around the Vale Royal have been trying to get answers as to what has been happening with the property. They have written to OPM, they have tried for 2 years, and they haven't gotten any answers. So while we contemplate what we are going to do, just let's ensure that the basic things, I'm not talking about spending millions and millions to refurbish the building, just keeping the grounds in a state that it look good. As simple as that. And I don't think that is much to ask. And that is why I ask these questions, based on the deterioration. We understand that the building is 300 years old. We understand that it would have deteriorated. But, you know, the skepticism that people in the community would have is not unfounded about what the property may have become. Yeah. Because, quite frankly, there's just a lot of unplanned, there's a lot of development in that area where single-family homes have been knocked down, high-rises are being built, and frankly, it's another debate, but it has been extremely disruptive for people who have lived there for a very long time. In your considerations, you have indicated it's not likely to be the home of a Prime Minister. So is there, in the short term, so are you then saying there would be consideration somewhere else? I don't know whether on King's House lands or Jamaica House lands to identify a location that would be suitable for the home of a prime minister, whether the person chooses to live there or not. I think the country must have, as every country has, a location for the head of government to live in. So I'll ask you those.
Madam Speaker, again, let me just express, my gratitude to the member for bringing this matter to the Parliament. It's a very important debate to have because, Madam Speaker, too often we tend to devalue the importance of national structures and monuments. And it's very important that the Parliament debates this issue. Madam Speaker, the first concern raised by the member regarding the maintenance of the grounds. There is a standing staff that is responsible for the maintenance of the ground and the removal of any waste that may have accumulated there. I have seen, Madam Speaker, particularly after periods of heavy rains, that the grounds have overgrown quite rapidly. But the maintenance regiment, based upon the records that I have seen, would be maintained. Madam Speaker, I will take a second look, based upon what the member has raised, as to whether or not that maintenance regime should be increased, meaning that if they maintain once a month, then maybe it probably should be fortnightly. I will see whether or not that is a possibility, given the resources that it would take. Madam Speaker, on the question as to whether or not Vale Royal could be the final place where the home of the Prime Minister is sited, let's first of all say that I believe both sides of the House is in agreement that there should be an official residence of the Prime Minister. That is, a minimum for any state, that there should be. And so, yes, we on this side agree that there should be. Secondly, where could it be located? Madam Speaker, I don't think the King's House lands would be appropriate. That's you wouldn't want to have an encroachment there. I think Vale Royal itself could be, if, Madam Speaker, we could reach a point where the Jamaica National Heritage Trust would be willing to look at the historical heritage value of the property and make some accommodation for the construction on the same property, because it is a large-sized property, that on the same property there could be an official residence, and the building itself, the Vale Royal building itself, could become a museum or used in some other way. But these are decisions that would have to, these would be kind of national decisions, Madam Speaker. We would have to bring this to the Parliament and a decision made in the same way as we had a parliamentary committee that determined how the Parliament should be developed. So, Madam Speaker, I am open to that kind of discussion as to the location of the official residence of the Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, thank you. I want to join with my colleague on the questions that he has asked and say ask the Prime Minister specifically, in terms of a holistic view about how we view our purpose as a country. Culture plays a significant role in that. And over time, I think both administrations have lamented that we have not devoted the kind of time, effort, or resources that are integral to building not only the culture of our people, but preserving the artifacts. I mean, I just looked back at the estimates of expenditure at the Ministry of Culture, and as a former Minister of Culture myself, I can tell you that administrations do not respect the financial accommodation paid to the cultural ministries, which are in fact the ministries that are responsible for the JNHT. So the budget that this current minister gets, and it's so different over the years, is about 338 million Jamaican dollars, half of which goes to the payment and administration of staff. Well, 155 million. 149 million goes towards the preservation of the artifacts. So, Prime Minister, even if you are looking at preserving or creating a museum, if you look back in your budget and it's not coming in the estimates of expenditure, it's hollow. I want to ask you, at what point can we really as a parliament look at our global competitive advantage as a cultural nation that punches way above our weight class in terms of culture or people or music? We have to build these artifacts. Devon House is down the road. The IOJ is around the road. JNHT is right down here. It has artifacts in the yard that it can't even promote. When are we really going to say, okay, let's put the money where our mouth is? Vale Royal is only one place, and I support the development of it. As a matter of fact, just have some construction workers go up there and lift up the coat of arms because it's kind of falling off. Just something simple as that, a coat of paint. But let us look at Kingston as a creative city first, and let us identify those places. Devon House is doing a remarkable job. When, Prime Minister, can you honestly say that your administration is going to give the kind of attention in terms of budgetary allocation to preserving our cultural artifacts, our museums, and the kinds of places that we can give those young people an alignment of the purpose of who they are as Jamaican people? Thank you.
Madam Speaker, let me thank the member for raising these very important issues. They don't usually get raised in the Parliament or get the kind of attention that it is getting now. So let me say, first of all, that I totally agree with you that more needs to be done to not just preserve our cultural and heritage assets, but to realize the full benefit of them. But this is not to say, Madam Speaker, that this administration has not placed resources to the creative sector. During COVID, we did, and we still have resources allocated to that sector to help them recover and to quickly catch up from where they have fallen off because of the pandemic. So resources have been made available. Not all the resources have gone into the ministry itself. And Minister Grange is there quietly nodding in agreement with you because you are saying publicly what she has been saying in the cabinet. So there's a great level of sympathy. But as I had said before, the tough job is for us to make priorities. And right now, the priority has been to recover from COVID stronger. And, you know, every member inside here should appreciate that we have recovered stronger coming out of COVID. Better than most countries. Now, having come out of COVID, we have to now look at the areas that have suffered during that period of strict priority making. One of them would have been, for example, as you have mentioned, the creative sector and spending on our museums, as has suffered, you know, waste management and garbage collection, that has suffered as well. And coming out of the pandemic, we're going to have to refocus. My last thing in response to you, however, is that we need to think differently about how we preserve, maintain, and get value from our heritage sites, our monuments, and our artifacts. There is a school of thought which says anything that is declared as a heritage site, as a monument, that it must not be used. It must be untouched. It must be left in its original state, meaning the state where it is deteriorating. And it must be locked off and not used. I'm saying that there is a school of thought. I'm not incorrect. There are other schools of thought.
Heritage and development.
There are other schools of thought which favor and believe that the best way to preserve your heritage is to actually use it. To have the sites being functional, being accessible. And, well, I mean, once you have them functional, accessible, you can then gain resources from that which will be used for its maintenance. It is a divergent school of thought, and I think greater effort ought to be made to come to a more realistic understanding as to how we are going to exploit our cultural assets for our benefit, whilst preserving the integrity and dignity of the assets.
I don't hear anybody else. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business. Public business. Minister.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
The question before the House is that the standing orders be suspended to allow the Minister to take the motion, notice of which he gave earlier. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister.
Madam Speaker, I now move, be it resolved that the first. Wait a minute.
Just before you proceed, do you have copies for?
Yes, I do. I do. Madam Speaker, I'm going to, before I move the resolution, I was going to beg the understanding of the leader and the opposition member just to narrate what is in the document, not advocating and saying stuff is good or bad, just narrating what is there to aid public understanding and indeed understanding of members of the House. Just say what is in there. It's otherwise hard to put it together. So, Madam Speaker, the tabling of the supplementary estimates. So, Madam Speaker, I table today the first supplementary estimates for the financial year 2022-23. Shortly after the 22-23 budget was tabled on the February 10th, 2022, Russia commenced an invasion of the Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, which is currently ongoing and has had an impact of global proportions. The Russia-Ukraine conflict has contributed to disruptions in global supply chains, which had initially been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and has in particular severely affected the supply of oil, resulting in higher than anticipated inflation across the globe, as well as a deviation of other macroeconomic indicators. The impact of the unanticipated Russia-Ukraine conflict on individual countries led to countries implementing various measures to address inflation and its impact on their population and on the wider macroeconomy, and Jamaica is among those countries. The unprogrammed response to the impact of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, i.e. would not have been in the budget that was tabled on the 7th of February, but it was required. It is among the factors necessitating the tabling of the first supplementary estimates. The House of Representatives is aware that given the emergence of the Russia-Ukraine crisis and the emerging inflationary impact at the time, prior to the approval of the 22-23 budget, I announced a suite of measures to cushion the impact of the unanticipated inflation on those likely to be most affected. And the supplementary budget includes these amounts. The first was the energy co-pay, through which the government contributed 20% of the JPS bill for the 4 months April to July of 2022 of all postpaid households that consume 200 kilowatts of electricity or less, and $3,000 per month over the same period for prepaid residential customers. Expenditure under this energy co-pay program was $2.2 billion. There was a gas relief program and loan grant to owners of contract carriage and route taxi vehicles consisting of $600 million to be disbursed as a grant and $200 million in loans accessible through microfinance institutions under an unlending facility managed by the DBJ. Disbursements under the gas relief and loan facility are ongoing. 3, there was $152 million for transportation grants for PATH students. And 4, there is general welfare support for non-PATH beneficiaries totaling $550 million through the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, $189 million, through the Constituency Development Fund, another $189, through the Ministry of Local Government, $70 million, through the Poor Relief, $52 million, and through the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, another $50 million. Subsequent to the approval of the 2022-23 budget, additional measures have been announced, and these include back-to-school grants valued at $1.2 billion, of which $1.05 billion represents an additional sum provided to augment the normal grants provided to the PATH students under the Ministry of Labour and Social Security to facilitate the payment of grants in respect of each of 160,000 student beneficiaries, and $189 million in education grants and assistance to non-PATH beneficiaries of non-PATH vulnerable students identified by members of Parliament dispersed through the Constituency Development Fund in the Office of the Prime Minister. Madam Speaker, we had one-off grants to public servants who with gross earnings of $1.5 billion or less, disbursed to ministries, departments and agencies through the Accountant General's Central Treasury Management System, and this cost $353 million. Madam Speaker, grants to pensioners in receipt of pension at $1.5 million or less per annum, with $523 million allocated to NIS pensioners and $100 million to 10,000 social pensioners, was also disbursed through the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. And an amount of $150 million to facilitate the trucking of water to areas that were experiencing inconsistent rainfall or drought, disbursed through the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development. The first supplementary estimates, Madam Speaker, seeks to, among other things, appropriately allocate the above expenditures valued at $7.2 billion across relevant ministries, departments and agencies. In addition to the measures, Madam Speaker, at alleviating the inflationary impact on those most affected, additional allocations are proposed for the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, a net increase of $5.1 billion, of which $4 billion is to support island-wide drain cleaning. Of which there's an error in the text that's written, the way it is written, of which $4 billion is to support island-wide drain cleaning, debushing, minor repairs to gullies, and approximately $3.9 billion for patching, local and general rehabilitation of damaged roadways island-wide. The $4 billion is there's a typo. The $3.9 billion for the patching of local and secondary roads. The Ministry of Health and Wellness estimates reflect a net increase of $3.6 billion to support the payment of arrears for goods and services in the regional health authorities and the procurement of drugs and medical supplies. 1.1 billion to JUTC towards the company's fuel costs and other operating expenditure. 1.5 billion to the JDF, Ministry of National Security, 6 billion, of which 1.5 billion for the JDF, 3.3 billion for the police department, and 862 million for the Department of Correctional Services. The Ministry of Education, Madam Speaker, an allocation of 2.2 billion, including 530 million to supply laptops, computers to teachers under the heads of agreement with the JTA. 592 million towards the production of breakfast snacks for past students. 140 million for critical repairs identified in schools, and 270 million towards the expansion of broadband in schools is reflected in the Ministry of Science, Energy, Technology budget. Madam Speaker, it also includes $1.1 billion to the Ministry of Local Government, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security to facilitate an increase in the regular path payments of 18% for this fiscal year. Madam Speaker, the supplementary budget table also contemplates an increase of $21.1 billion in compensation of employees. This arises primarily from the discussions with public sector unions and staff associations in respect of the compensation restructure program for implementation during this fiscal year. Also contributing to this increase, Madam Speaker, is a $2.2 billion amount requested by the Ministry of Health and Wellness to facilitate the payment of salary-related allowances. Madam Speaker, capital expenditure reflects a net increase of $1.3 billion above the approved budget, driven mainly by the additional allocation of $4.1 billion to the South Coast Highway Improvement Program to facilitate mobilization of 5 remaining work packages and the installation of water lines. Of the additional requirement by the SCHIP project, $2.8 billion was reallocated from the Ministry of Finance's capital contingency provision for new projects. $1.2 billion was also reallocated from this category to the Ministry of Transport and Mining and the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation for the acquisition of 50 buses for the JUTC and $400 million to commence implementation of the widening and dualization of Grange Lane, St. Catherine. Madam Speaker, the indicated increase in debt service of $6 billion arises from the impact of increases in interest rates on interest payments. Madam Speaker, although 70% approximately of the government's local debt stock is fixed, the increase in the policy rate affects the variable rate instruments. Interest rate payments are expected to increase by $10.8 billion on a gross level, reflecting the result of monetary actions, but this $10.8 billion is countered by a $4.8 billion decrease on amortization payments, which is due primarily to the dynamics of the exchange rate, which at this point have been favorable. Madam Speaker, very importantly, the proposed $60 billion increase in expenditure will be financed primarily through an expected $65.5 billion increase in revenue flows. The performance of revenues over the first half of the fiscal year has been significantly better than budgeted, reflecting the higher than anticipated recovery of the economy from the impact of COVID-19, as well as higher than expected inflation. At the end of September 2022, Madam Speaker, total revenues were $40.4 billion above budget, including $35 billion from tax revenue and this performance has been factored into the current forecast, which now anticipates total revenue flows of $815.3 billion for the current fiscal year 2022-23, Madam Speaker, which is up on the original forecast. Madam Speaker, Jamaica has continued to perform well within the context of disruptive events that have had a negative impact globally, and the government has sought to utilize this performance in such a way that the most affected receive some level of assistance while ensuring that Jamaica gets back on track towards legislated fiscal objectives.
Thank you, Minister. And I would say it is always useful to have the narrative versus persons trying to go through the big yellow book to determine exactly what is being done. Madam Speaker, the additional revenues are not unexpected. There's been recovery in the economy. Higher than projected inflation has assisted the higher than projected tax revenues. Minister, I want to focus on the lion's share of the additional expenditure, which is the public sector compensation review. And I've been concerned just based on what I've heard in the public domain. So I have a couple of questions. First, if you could indicate how many of the public sector bargaining units have given a positive indication to signing on to the new arrangements that you are proposing. Secondly, if you could indicate what accounts for the additional $21 billion above your projection, which you would have made in the original budget. Third, is there a section of categories of workers who have been offered 17.5% over a 3-year period? Again, I'm asking because I want clarity. I've been told there is a band within which some workers are being offered 17.5% over a 3-year period. Fourth, if you could indicate what the status of the motor vehicle concession is. We were told it was, my terms, kind of in abeyance, not taken off the table, but no confirmation that it would continue. So if you could answer those questions related to the public sector. Really.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, indeed, in the supplementary estimates that have been tabled of the new expenditure of $60 billion, as in the member's words, 21.1, which represents a large proportion of it, is directed towards compensation of employees. It is well known, Madam Speaker, that the government is engaged in a restructuring of public sector compensation and is having simultaneous conversations, which is not normally how things are done. Normally, conversations happen sequentially with a number of public sector unions. And, Madam Speaker, I have refrained from engaging in public discourse about those conversations, and I would ask for some amount of liberty to continue that disposition because it is helpful to the process. What I will say is that the extra expenditure arises from the discussions that we have been having, and the government, within the limits of the fiscal realities and the fiscal abilities of the government, it has been making adjustments to some areas of the proposals, and those necessitate those changes that we have signaled to individual unions that we are favorably disposed towards and can accommodate. We have to make provision for them in the line item, compensation of employees. It wouldn't be appropriate, Madam Speaker, until we are concluded to itemize what they all were. But I certainly will, at a time when we have reached agreement on all matters, we will be able to share in this House and with the public at large what those are. And so even before coming here today, and one of the reasons why I came 20 minutes after is that I was engaged in discussions with certain groups and those continue almost on a daily basis. We're have made significant progress. The last mile is always sometimes the most difficult. I would ask for your forbearance, member, and accommodation that I can just stay out of this. There will be a time that the specifics will be disclosed to all members of the public, but until such time that we've agreed, I would rather continue that disposition, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I understand the dilemma the minister is in, but I would also say the absence of information gives rise to speculation. And it also doesn't help in terms of building public trust when bits and pieces of information are put out in the public domain. There is no clarity about whether the information is correct. And as such, in the absence of that, it leads to that speculation. I would also say, if I consider myself and all of us as public sector workers, we are totally in the dark. I am. Parliamentarians, let me say that. I'm being specific, parliamentarians. And there are other categories of workers who feel the same way, that they are hearing that something is going on. They don't know whether they're going to, and you have given an assurance that nobody will be worse off. But when people do the calculations, when they take their allowances, which are non-tax, gross them up, they see themselves being below where they are. So again, in the absence of information, you don't have an opportunity to build that trust among the public sector workers. Now, I know if I ask you when you will be able to tell me, you're going to tell me you don't know, because it's an ongoing process. But I do believe there has to be a way, even without giving very detailed specifics, to provide the nation with an update on what I'd consider to be probably the most significant exercise in terms of public sector compensation that the country has ever undertaken, and from the perspective of the cost to the country as well. So while there's a balance, because you're in the middle of negotiations, there is also a need for the public to be aware of where we are in the process so that you can reduce the speculation and the apprehension, which I would say exists among some groups simply because they don't have information.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, thank the member for that intervention. The groups with whom we are in dialogue have the information as it pertains to their group. Certainly, it has been a feature of the discussion so far that representatives send information out to their members, and then that information sent to a specific group of members, which can number in the thousands, spills over into the general public. And that's unavoidable and not under our control. But please be assured that representatives of workers have all the information that pertains to their groups. With respect to parliamentarians and councillors, it is certainly the case that I am in communication from various parliamentarians on both sides, from councillors on both sides, who want to hear and are anxious to hear about how the public sector compensation exercise will affect them. I have, whenever I'm in receipt of such communication, I've sought to assure members that the approach that we are taking, and I've asked for your support on this, is to make progress with the citizens we serve first. And once we've made progress with the citizens we serve, then I give you my undertaking that we'll convene the appropriate forum where we can discuss with parliamentarians, with members of the local authorities, how the public sector compensation affects them. The good news is that we've made significant progress, and I'm quite hopeful that before long we'll be able to be processing the payments that will be due from April 1st. I will use this opportunity, since you've raised the issue, to just make the point that it is absolutely imperative that we make that we conclude in sufficient time that the payments that are due for 2022 are made in the fiscal year 2022-23. So the government has been very accommodative in terms of the timeline, but there is a natural limit, Madam Speaker, because Mr. Speaker, because the amount we are making these changes we're making these changes effective April 1st, 2022. We by the end of this month, 8 months of 2022 would have gone. By January, 10 months would have gone. And 10 months of what we proverbially call back pay is a large amount that is being budgeted for in this fiscal year, and if it is not paid in this fiscal year, the space to accommodate it in the next fiscal year does not exist. Does not exist. So it is very important that everyone is aware, that employees, workers are aware, that leaders of representative groups are aware that if we want to have the back pay paid in, we need to conclude in sufficient time that we can pay it this year. The government is anxious to make these. No, we're close. But I'm just in the spirit. This will not come as a surprise to the members with whom we are in discussions. But I'm just you asked for information. I'm taking the country into our confidence to just point out a natural challenge that we have to meet, right? You know, the expenditure for the back pay is tens and tens of billions of dollars that we need to get out of the system this year. Yeah.
Just two more specific questions. There's an additional $6 billion for the Ministry of National Security, JDF 1.5, the police 3.3. Could you indicate where those funds are going to be directed, particularly given the issue of our very high murder rate and the state of crime and violence in the country? Could you also indicate under the gas relief grant if there's been full take-up of the facility that was budgeted for? And then finally, on an issue related to our teachers, could you indicate if all outstanding salaries for teachers that were due have been paid? I've been getting information that there are still significant numbers of teachers who have not received their salaries. I don't know if it's correct, so you can help me.
Thank you for those questions. And these are questions that are best addressed in standing finance. But since since I'm standing, right. So with respect to the amounts for the police and JDF, there are many different categories. The JDF, for example, has one of the expenditure items that was agreed to in the last round of negotiations was not, for some reason the JDF did it. You'll recall that we signed off on the 4% with the security forces in February of this year, 2022. And the JDF came after that. So they have not yet received some elements of that. And there's an amount in here. But there are amounts as well for supplies for the police, as well as amounts for police stations and so forth. I will provide the details in standing finance, and some of it may come out in PAC as well. You asked another question. Right. The gas relief, as we know, the gas relief, you apply for it online. It's not yet, the amount that we have provided has not yet been exhausted. We have had so far 7,000 applications. So if all applications were processed, not processed, if all applications were validated as being eligible, then that would be under 200 million. So we are well short. We have a lot of room for persons to apply. Is that the question you're asking?
Yeah, because the information I got is that the number of applicants has been pretty low. I don't know if it's because of the online procedure and that target audience, whether it has been a difficult process for people to apply, I don't know. But I mean, you would think in an environment where gas prices were running way above that, you would have had a larger uptake. So I think it's worth examining the process, given that there was clearly a need and people would have wanted that relief.
Well, we have proven the process in the sense that during the pandemic, we had, in other words, signing up takes a minute on the phone, and there are only a few pieces of data required: name, TRN, something to do with your registration number, and one or two other variables. It's a process that is auditable, and it's very, very important for programs such as this, and very transparent. Huh? So you might have. Go ahead.
And just on the question that the member asked on the process itself, because even during, just by the numbers that have been given by the Ministry of Finance, even during the COVID, the grant that was offered during the COVID period, only 40% of the 37,000 public passenger operators actually got through. Way more applied. But there seems to be a problem even with the system now, that when persons are applying, it's still either kicking them off, there is actually a problem there with the system. So I'll implore you to have your team look at it, because you have 37,000 operators. If 7,000 alone has applied, and it is not a lack of wanting the grant that has been offered, but there's actually a problem with the system.
Yeah, so remember, that I will certainly look into it. The figure that I shared with you of 7,000 is the number of applicants. Where the problem would usually arise is applicants who get through. So I'm saying to you, right, so I'm saying to you, I'm providing information that would support the argument that not a lot of people have applied. That is definitely the case. And the reason for not applying could be complex, and that's something that we'll certainly look into. But when you're dealing with these numbers of persons and there isn't an established paper-based process, having an online process provides assurance to the members of the public that you can account for the expenditure and who gets what. And it's very important that we continue to support online modality. But I will look into it as you suggest.
Minister, in terms of the financing of the budget, I know that you've been tracking well ahead of your revenue projections this fiscal year, largely driven by imported inflation and domestic inflation, and the impact that would have on indirect taxation, which is a charge on the nominal price of whether it be domestic sales or imported items. Would you just confirm to the House how far ahead of your budgeted revenue you are for fiscal year to date, or let us say to the end of September, if you have that data, and how you plan to deal with those surpluses?
So Madam Speaker, just to add to the data that you're bringing, it's all categories of revenues that have overperformed. We have three major categories: income and production, consumption, and importation or border revenues. And all three categories we have seen large increases over budget. For the 6 months to September 30th of 2022, overall revenues are up $40 billion vis-a-vis budget, and tax revenues are up by $35 billion as compared to budget.
And Minister, how do you plan to address those surpluses in terms of how do you plan to utilize them? We were saying that you should be cushioning the crisis We had suggested 2% of GDP, which is about $40 billion for the year. You've more or less achieved that in 6 months through surpluses which are not budgeted and would not have entailed any deferral or slowing down of the pace of debt reduction, which is how, based on the original budget, I was anticipating it could have been financed. So, I'm just interested how you're going to apply this largesse that has come in to the kitty.
So, remember, one of the reasons for since you're using it to laud your approach, one of the reasons for the approach that we're taking is that it allows you to respond to situations that were not anticipated at the time the budget was laid. So in a nutshell, we're proposing an increase in expenditure of approximately $60 billion that is supported by a projected increase in revenues of $65 billion. We have already accounted for 35 of that 65, and we are making room for we are projecting that for the next 6 months we'll have a 30 billion over the original budget. The 30 obviously taking into account what could happen externally if a recession develops in overseas markets and how that could affect us, so we have to factor that in. The $60 billion in additional expenditure is broadly broken down into the following categories. I'm going to see if I can build it up. On the capital side, $1 billion more than budgeted. As far as interest is concerned, on a net basis, $6 billion more than budgeted, which you will agree that in a debt stock of $2 trillion, right? That's a debt stock of Jamaica. That's how much Jamaica owes, $2 trillion. On a debt stock of $2 trillion, a $6 billion increase in interest expenditure is very benign compared to what's happening in other countries. So $1 billion capital, $6 billion net on interest. We have $21 billion on compensation of employees, and I was asked a number of questions on that a while ago. And then the remainder would be on programmed expenditure. Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, roads and drain cleaning and whatever, Ministry of Health, and I went through the categories. So $5 billion for the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job. I don't need to go over them again. Yeah.
Just one question. On the amortization side, I see that you're projecting to reduce the level of debt amortization this fiscal year by around $4 billion. Just explain how that has come about.
Right. So the two categories of debt service that we have are we pay back interest, we pay interest, and we pay back principal, which we call amortization. As I mentioned, interest goes up, but amortization, which is paying back principal, we are projecting that to decline because we would have forecast at the beginning of the year particular exchange rate levels which have not materialized, and on the repayment of our foreign debt in Jamaican dollars will therefore be less than we had projected. The FX translation, yeah.
So I had asked a question which your colleague behind you kind of nodded, and she may be able to help in terms of the payment of teacher salaries and whether there are outstanding amounts that are still there from payment of teacher salaries.
No, thanks for reminding me of that. Thank you. It's an issue that's been in the press. Someone in my constituency came up to me on the weekend and, that they were in that position. So I'm aware of it as a representative myself. What I can say is that the government has made all the financial provisions for all salaries in Jamaica, including teacher salaries. So I just want to make that clear. The matter is being resolved in the Ministry of Education. There might have been some technical issues that could have resulted in that experience, which is very unfortunate, but the matter, the Minister assures me, is being resolved.
I knew it was not, Minister, it was not an issue.
Sorry. We seem to have forgotten that this is not a ministerial statement, but rather a debate on a motion to refer to the supplementary estimate to the PAC.
Yes. PAAC.
PAAC, sorry.
Yes.
Each member is normally given an allocation to speak and only once on a motion.
I know. It's just one last one and we finish. Done after this. But it's because it's an important point. No, the point is, I knew the issue is not about a lack of financial resources. But you know, at the end of the day, when somebody don't get their salary, there is no consolation telling them that the money is there. I don't know if it's an issue of schools that may have moved from being bursa paid to being ministry paid. Well, I'm asking because there are still people who have not gotten the pay. And I don't know the specific number, but all of us can appreciate that it is a big issue for those who haven't. That's my final question.
Yeah, no. So just acknowledging that we definitely agree that for the person who is on the receiving end of that, it's hardly, that's not a good experience, and not a good experience at all. And which is why the government is working assiduously to solve the problem. And I believe the numbers are now down to a few. Yeah, right. In relation to the 26,000. But for each person who has been affected, we are deeply grieved by that. So, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I now move, be it resolved that the first supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year.
I've been signaling to ask, Minister, how concerned are you about the situation at the port at the moment, and what kind of assurance? What kind of it affects? It's going to have some fiscal impact. It's going to have some fiscal impact. What assurance you can give, and that's your bailiwick on the resolution of that.
Yeah. So Mr. Speaker, I'll just permit the liberty to. That is economic recovery at a pace that's above what we had planned. Has teething pains, and one of the teething pains is that we have a lot of activity at our ports, a lot, and we're going to have to make adjustments so that the additional volume can be accommodated. But one compromise that we cannot make is on the security side, right? That some people have wanted us, right, in that the security procedures have to be followed and maintained, and we have to support the Customs Administration as far as that is concerned. But we will, at the same time, need to introduce measures that can alleviate some of the congestion. But the congestion arises from a good thing. And the good thing is that volumes are up significantly. And sometimes good things lead to challenges, and we have to address the challenges. Yeah.
Before you sit, Minister,
you have spoken already, member. So we are going to ask that the member asks for the approval of the motion. Sorry.
I actually was just following up on a question on the member asked. No,
Member, you can ask a question.
I'm asking the question.
Not
a question I'm asking. I'm asking the question because it came up at the PAAC, the interim report which we presented in the House last week. No, the JUTC. Yeah, well, and because you speak about cushioning the crisis, and obviously for the JUTC it has not been cushioned, because here an additional 1.65 billion, which 522 for fuel and another 542 million for toll. And I just want to ask the Minister, at what point, I said it was a concern from members, coming out of the committee meeting, the PAAC, which was reported, entities such as the JUTC, which are the subvention to the JUTC is $6.8 billion for this financial year, yet so far. At what point do we look at the entity as a whole and look at how it is to cauterize the losses that it is? I know that you have ordered 1.1 billion for new buses, but that 50 new buses will not take care of the shortfall.
that the JUTC is currently seeing. At what point do the Ministry of Finance step in, even though you have a ministry that is in charge, but to look at the entity, look at its overall operation to help to cauterize that cost taxpayers this $6.8 billion annually to keep it open?
Mr. Speaker, the member can get a lot of credit for consistency, because this is a topic that he has spoken on a number of occasions and questions. And his concern is well understood. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to just remind the member that the JUTC has two sources of income. One is revenue from the traveling public, and the second is a subvention from the government. The government of Jamaica has taken the view that to cushion the crisis, notwithstanding the costs of the JUTC, we have kept fares to the traveling public constant and not increased them, which has meant that the increase in costs of the JUTC have to be financed by a subvention from the government of Jamaica. And that is unavoidable under the circumstances.
Wouldn't the minister say that because of the lack of policy from the administration, the JUTC has suffered? Because if the JUTC has two sources of revenue, one is of subvention, which is taxpayers' money subsidizing the JUTC. We could say as rural MPs that the children and the elderly in rural parishes don't get the same benefit as those in the KMTR, but yet still their tax dollar is subsidizing the JUTC. But the JUTC, less than 50% of the fleet that will give them that additional revenue that we could see a lowering of the subvention from government. So to say that those are two sources and you're cushioning the crisis, this is not saying that.
Member, are you going to get to
the crisis?
Are you going to get to the question? Or are you making a statement?
Well, if you disturb me, I will not.
No,
get
but
to the question.
you're not asking a question, member. Please get to the question. Get to the question.
So, would the minister say then, because of the policies of the administration yet so far, has hurt the JUTC to this point?
Well, member, I think the choice of words, reflects maybe the member's frustration, but I wouldn't use those words, member. I do understand that when you see a subvention for the year that's approximately $7 billion towards public transportation, you're within your rights to ask questions about that. But I believe the policy choices that are available to the government, increasing fees to the traveling public or increasing subvention, at this point, right, we have to increase it, but we have to increase the subvention. But it doesn't stop there, as you're pointing out. We need to invest further in the JUTC with additional buses, and indeed this supplementary estimate releases $1.1 billion to the Ministry of Transport to complete the acquisition of 50 new buses. And in the next fiscal year, we will release more to acquire another tranche of buses. But more than that, what we want to do is to acquire buses that use fuel, the kinds of fuel that will give us greater efficiencies all around. So that's a trajectory. I think we can see eye to eye on that, member. The drive towards recapitalizing the stock of the JUTC in terms of its physical stock, and doing so in a way that achieves greater levels of fuel efficiency and financial efficiency. And Mr. Speaker,
Just very quickly, two very, very short questions. I have not spoken at all for the day. I just wanted to ask you, Minister, exactly where is reflected the anticipated additional payments for our security officers given the landmark ruling as it relates to the issue of contractors. I wasn't sure I could have found it, so it would be good for you to just point that out. The other is really around our pensioners. I don't know if you have heard the conversation, that it seems as if it's about 5 years before most of our public servants can think about actually receiving a pension. We have been hearing that, whether it is from Ministry of Education or Ministry of Health. And I just wanted to know if any accommodation is also made in the supplementary to deal with issues like those.
So, Madam Speaker, let me just remind the member that it was, even though it's a fact, that it was the NHT that took a matter forward, and the NHT is a part of the government. Just want to state some facts. Now, with respect,
just for clarification,
yes.
Minister, you are aware that 60% of the security guards are probably employed by government, and government does have, as the largest employer of labor, a significant number of individuals who are classified as contractors, but would fall, yeah, that's the point I'm making, who would fall under the same category as these security officers.
Why, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, to open it up, the floodgates have been opened of questions. So we have been very clear with our partners in the unions that those are issues that we intend to resolve. The issue in government is different than the issue that was brought to court. Government does pay its NHD and pays them as employees, right? But having said that, there are residual issues that that accumulated over decades across many administrations in the 90s, in the 2000s, in the 2010s. And at the right time, we'll give a full historical account of how this problem arose. It's a problem today, but the problem now is at such a level that we need to approach it with a level of alacrity, but also be mindful and be very strategic about how we do it so that we can do it properly. I've given my commitment that once we're finished with the review, this is a matter that we will look into with our partners in the union, can't do it alone, with addressing in the best possible way. If it were just limited to 100 employees here, it would be easy. But we're talking about potentially tens of thousands of persons. So it requires a dedicated response, and you have my commitment that it's, as I've given to my colleagues in the union movement, that is an area that we will, just like how we dive deep into this compensation restructuring and got consultants, and we're going to do the same thing with this. We're going to look into the problem in depth, and we're going to come up and propose solutions. But I need to get this phase over first.
Just to say, Minister, you keep saying that the conversation with the unions. I want to remind the government that in terms of certainly many individuals who are employed as contractors, and in particular the security officers, which I made mention of earlier, that it's not a union matter as far as they are concerned. We need to make sure that their representatives or appointed representatives are also part of the discourse, and that it is not settled without their input.
Good point. Point taken on that. I agree with you. Yeah. So, Madam Speaker, be it resolved that the first supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2023, and the Jamaica Public Body's first supplementary estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2023, which were laid on the table of the House on the 8th day of November 2022, be referred to the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report.
Members, you have heard the motion put by the Minister. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. Minister, the motion has been approved. Minister, would you care to indicate when it is that the PAAC will meet?
Madam Speaker, just in conversation with the chairman of the PAAC, we're working on Wednesday, the 16th of November, Madam Speaker, with a time to be set after further discussion with the chairman of the PAAC.
To come. Huh? The income tax, huh? I don't see it. Which one? Where? I can't put debate on what? I don't see it. Pass it. Taking of the income tax, huh?
Madam Speaker, I rise. Yeah, I rise, Madam Speaker, to introduce the Income Tax Amendment Act 2022 with amendment sheet, which is a companion bill to the Special Economic Zones Act of 2022, which was passed a few weeks ago. The bill, Madam Speaker, as tabled, has 3 typographical errors, which I must say, it didn't go to the printing office with those errors, just to defend members from the CPC and AGC and so forth. And they're corrected on a list of amendment sheet which has been circulated, and I thank the member for graciously pointing them out in advance, which has allowed us to make the amendments. Madam Speaker, both bills, Madam Speaker, this Income Tax Amendment Act 2022 and the Special Economic Zones Amendment Act 2022 are being amended to ensure conformity with international standards of tax transparency, as well as to improve the efficiency in administration of the regime. The amendment to the Special Economic Zones Act was to legislatively provide for substance requirements in our SCZ to ensure that there are reduced opportunities for revenue leakage locally or shifting of profits internationally. Madam Speaker, in addition to amending the Special Economic Zones Act, it was noted that amendments were also needed to the Income Tax Act to ensure the 2 pieces of legislation continued to jointly give effect to the policy as intended by government. Madam Speaker, the Special Economic Zones Act is a successor to the Jamaica Export Free Zone Act of 1982, which was repealed effective August 2021. The CESA, for short, was designed to be a modernized regime that would take advantage of changes in global production and market conditions, which presented new opportunities for small developing economies like Jamaica's to participate in the global value and supply chains. During the administration of the regime over the last 6 years, Madam Speaker, it has been noted that there were instances in the legislation where the policy was not clearly articulated. The Special Economic Zones Act is a preferential regime which is the subject of peer review by international entities such as the organization, of the OECD's Forum for Harmful Tax Practices, as well as the European Union. In its 2020 review by the OECD, a determination was made that, and this is our, OECD has a peer group. A determination was made that legislative amendments were needed to make to clarify aspects of the regime in order for the SEZ to be compliant with Jamaica's international obligations. Madam Speaker, as we prepared to make the necessary legislative amendments to ensure the regime's compliance with international standards, we determined it would be an opportune time to make other changes to the SEZ Act and the Income Tax Act to improve administration of the regime by addressing the ambiguities noted by current users of the zone, investors and administrators. Madam Speaker, it should be stressed that the SEZ's policy objective has always been to increase the productive capacity of the economy, and the incentives provided to entities in the special economic zones are designed to facilitate their contribution to nation building. These incentives can be found across multiple pieces of tax legislation, including the Income Tax Act. Madam Speaker, one of the primary incentives provided for the Income Tax Act is employment tax credit. However, the Special Economic Zones legislation had provisions which effectively prohibit entities in special economic zones from claiming this benefit. This was addressed in substance with the amendment of the Special Economic Zones Act passed weeks ago. However, the amendment to this bill will provide clarity for the legislation which guides administrators on how the regime is to operate. Madam Speaker, the amendment is twofold. It firstly, in clauses 2 and 3, inserts the word business in respect of the application of the employment tax credit and the treatment of dividends in section 32A and 38 respectively. This ensures that entities that do business process outsourcing are properly contemplated by the Act, ensuring that these entities receive the legislative authority to operate in the zone and receive the benefits contemplated by the Acts together. Second, in Clause 4, Madam Speaker, it deletes the provisions in the first schedule which references the Repeal Free Zones and Free Zones Act. As such, both the TAJ and the Special Economic Zones Authority can continue to function cohesively as intended by policy. Madam Speaker, I now ask the House to approve the Income Tax Amendment Act 2022 along with the amendments that have been tabled to update and improve the efficiency of the Act, as well as to ensure it works cohesively with the Special Economic Zones Act.
Members.
Yeah. Minister, you correctly mentioned that the Special Economic Zone legislation is preferential in its operation. What I wanted to ask you, Minister, is you mentioned that this is the changes are being made to make the Act compliant with our international obligation. What specific obligations are those? Those are not the trade. That's not under the WTO arrangement. What are those specific obligations?
So, Madam Speaker, Jamaica is a signatory to a number of tax treaties. And under those tax treaties, we are obliged to subject ourselves to peer review by a panel that consists of other member countries. Jamaica goes and peer reviews other countries as well. And when the panel peer reviewed Jamaica's framework in 2020, they found certain weaknesses in the substance requirements for SEZs to operate and to benefit from the preferential tax arrangements in Jamaica. And the substance requirements are simply that in order to there were provisions by which SEZs could be set up and have no substance or have little substance in Jamaica by way of employees and a fixed place of operation and so forth. So those amendments were made in the SEZ amendments that came to the House a couple of weeks ago. Now, what compounded the problem or challenge is that when the OECD made those pronouncements, the European Union, which has a separate process, kind of jumped in as well and also identified that as a weakness. And recently, the German parliament would have passed certain laws that said, their companies are prohibited from doing business with countries that run afoul of the, some of these harmful practices. So long before those resolutions are passed in the German parliament, the work to make these amendments, including the Special Economic Zones Amendment, was well underway. But just for the fulsomeness to respond to your question, I've just given you the full 100, as they say.
The reason I ask, Minister, is because the truth is, when the Germans and others complain about harmful taxation, the question must be asked, harmful to whom? Because we come to this arrangement with certain deficits. They come to these arrangement with certain strengths. And if we're going, the truth is, if we're going to get investment flows into this area, then we have to make those calculations as were made for the level of development, some of the issues that are termed risk, that enhance our risk, and those simply have to be addressed. Otherwise, you're not playing on the same playing field, and there's no basis on which you can compete or successfully attract certain types of investment. I also make the note that the substance requirement is largely around a quantitative, some sort of dollar figure. The requirement is not so much around, well, that's not true, but the amendment here now on the income tax seem to address some of the substantive, the qualitative aspects of it. But let me ask you specifically, just as an example, if this was given thought to, and what the implication will be. In the SEZ legislation, we were careful that the legislation itself was preferential, was one thing, but we had in the legislation paid particular attention to the benefits and the opportunity for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. What these changes are being proposed in either of the legislation, or the SEZ amendment, and working in tandem with the amendment to the Income Tax Act, how will that operate to affect the MSME provisions in the agreement? Has that been given into consideration?
Yeah, so remember, there indeed is a global debate about the architecture that governs the determination of harmful tax practices. But this may not be the issue on which to join in that conversation, in the sense that there is merit to the substance argument if you want to maintain at the same time double taxation treaties with other countries. A double taxation treaty can be significantly advantageous to both countries who enter into it, because it provides investors with the assurance that they won't suffer from double taxation. However, if in one of those regimes you have preferential arrangements without substance requirements, then it can allow businesses in the other country to benefit at the expense of that country's regime. And this was pointed out with respect to the SEZ, and it was a small change, and that change came weeks ago. This is just an ancillary tidying up matter, which is a good thing, and something you should be, I know you will applaud, that once this amendment is passed, the employment tax credit which Jamaican businesses enjoy will now unequivocally and unambiguously be available to companies that operate in the SEZ regime, whether they're medium, small, or large, and that's a good thing.
Just an implication for the MSMEs in the provision of an operation for the MSMEs in the SEZ legislation.
To the best of my knowledge, no. I don't think nothing hinges on that particular issue.
Is this being applied prospectively or retroactive? Any retroactive application, or just prospective?
I mean, I would think that it's not a matter, we won't be able to go backwards, and it doesn't apply, it's going forward. Yeah.
The grandfathering.
It applies going forward. Let's just leave it that way.
Is there an amendment? 32.
Can I now move that the bill, that we move for the second reading of the bill, Madam Speaker?
Just before we move for the second reading of the bill, just for our general information as a parliament, and I'm looking at section 32 of the standing orders. When a bill is being done, to prevent the constant back and forth of questions, the procedure really is that the minister bring in the bill, he says what he has to say, and members may ask questions of the minister, at which point he should really make a note of them, and when all the questions are completed, he answers them, so that you don't have the backing and forthing of this bill, that bill, this question, that question, because really and truly it is not a ministerial question, and I'm being guided by section 32 of the standing orders. That really is the correct procedure, and it will help us so that we can get through more efficiently in the parliament. No, he did say that he did not have a statement. He did indicate, and we did move on from that item. He did not. All right. So the question is before the House is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favor?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Amendment Act, read a second time.
The House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause. Beg your pardon? All bill. Members, the question before the House is that we put clauses 1 to 4. Those in favor? As amended. As amended. Members, let's go slowly. I now put the amendment to the clauses, to the bill. Those in favor of the amendments are in clause 1, amendment to clause 1, where we delete the clause and substitute therefore the words, the act may be cited as the Income Tax Amendment Act 2022 and shall be read and construed as one with the Income Tax Act, hereinafter referred to as a principal act. Those in favor? The amendment to clause 4. In clause 4, we're going to delete the word of, where it appears after the word schedule, and substitute therefore the word to. So instead of, we have to. Those in favor? And in the long title, we delete and substitute thereof the following: an act to amend the Income Tax Act. Those in favor? Those again. So members, I now put the clauses 1 to 4 and the amendments. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. And I put the title and the enacting clause as amended. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put it back. Members, I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 3 amendments. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, may I ask that the bill be read a third time?
Members, the question is that the bill be read a third time. Madam Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act, read a third time and passed.
No, I don't need to do it. That goes to the table because the judge's salary.
Those against? The ayes have it. Members, the bill has been read a third time and is now passed. Minister, bill read a third time and passed.
Madam Speaker,
yeah, Ms.
It is not contemplated for us to do any further business today. I therefore ask that the House adjourns until Tuesday, November 15, 2022, 2 p.m. sharp.
The question before the House is that we do adjourn until next Tuesday, the 15th of November at 2 p.m. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. This House is now adjourned.